It's the Lekker Rugby Pod, only on Megaphone Rugby.
Episode 64 of the Lack Rugby Pod. Harry and I had a bit of a chat beforehand, and the one thing we do agree on is the fact that the music at that stadiums are just getting out of hand now. Harry, tell me about the raw feed you talked about, because I mean, if Sweet Caroline has been heard about 17 billion times across the world last Saturday, it's not a lot. It's understating it. Just tell me, you get a different feed than we do. We see adverts and stuff in between, but you can actually hear what's going on in the stadium. I've been ranting and raving about this music, especially after this Varsity Cup game we had last Monday, where they never stopped playing hip hop music for a single second. I mean, really. Geez, sorry, that I had to get that off my chest.
The man shouting at clouds. Yeah.
Yes, I
Turn
think
your
it's
music down. Listen, part of that's because I think you live in the shadow of Loftus, so you're probably even hearing Loftus when you're just
I do.
cutting the grass in their backyard. Yeah, so when you're watching, you can watch every rugby match around the world in the US because it's fixated on creating content channels, and so I can watch all the Japanese matches. I could watch second league Romanian if I want to. But sometimes the feed you get is raw. And so you get the setups with Jean de Villiers and Skalkberger telling a joke that's maybe not very appropriate before, or the check, 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 or, the producer getting mad because the lighting's not good on her hair or something. And so that's kind of fun. But you also get a lot more. They'll sometimes, like, you have Matt Pierce playing the replays and deciding which one is the good one. Like, nah, that doesn't show it well enough. And so that's actually super interesting, because sometimes you see things that don't appear on the final broadcast, Super Sport broadcast. And then the other thing that's really funny is you get the stadium feel. So for a while, especially around before the match or during halftime, they'll just let the thing sit there on the screen, and all the producers and commentators are off at the loo or getting a beer or whatever, and so you're just watching. You're just seeing the little three-legged races or whatever is going
the
on.
dinosaurs at Loftus.
Lighties, and you get a sense of DJs. So in the Welsh match somewhere, like Stormers playing, nothing's going on at all. It's like people are just walking around having a meat pie, pasty, what do they call it, and a beer, and chatting. When anything is staged at Loftus or Kings Park, Durban, it's all the time. It's house music, and a guy yelling, some guy shouting for various things, like, "Can I hear you?" That kind of stuff. It's all the time. It's incessant. And it's so funny to see. I think it's true of the Irish, Scottish, and Welsh. Something about them is a little bit more like, we don't want to be too silly, so they play that way down. Sometimes when you watch the French clubs play, it's South African times five. They have marching bands. They have squadrons of cheerleaders coming on. They have target practice with live guns. It's just wild. There's stuff going on. There's old men running around playing rugby and smashing each other. So I don't know. I think it's all about this desire to make the experience fun. Obviously, it's not really working for you, but I know that the French attendance is really good. I know Stormers pull really well. I think the South African attendance in the ERC is really making that whole league go up. So I don't
Well,
know.
is it because of the music, or is it despite the music? I mean,
Maybe it's the attitude that when you buy a ticket, you're going to come. There's going to be a concert. There's going to be fun. It's more of a vibe. I kind of get that, but I know what you mean. I'm just annoyed by the DJ when he doesn't understand the game context. Like, stop doing that, right? Like, if it's a scrum to decide the game, we don't need to hear from you right now. Like, it's just, can the Bulls win the penalty against the throw?
oh, well, that's a good point that you're raising there. The Bulls are in a good position, they're third in the log, but it's not because of how well they're playing at home. It's because of how well they played away from home. At home, they're suffering, and I'm telling you, it's because they hear Sweet Caroline too often. They can't hear themselves think. That's what it is. Like, the crowd's being taken out of the game. I honestly think so. I mean, I wrote the WhatsApp to Willem Strauss and I asked him, please just turn the volume down so we can at least hear each other when we're talking about the rugby that's happening on the field. We're sitting in the press box there, but we literally cannot hear each other talk. It's that loud. Honestly, the windows are vibrating. I mean,
It
maybe
is
that's
loud.
because that's too much, man.
I was at the Loftus test against the Irish, and then All Blacks test in Ellis Park, and everyone says Ellis Park is the loudest, and it's loud, no doubt. But Loftus is the loudest. I really think the only stadium I've ever been to that was louder than Loftus was the Stade de France in Saint-Denis for the quarterfinal. That was the loudest sporting event I've ever been a part of. And I think by 10 minutes in, I had disorientation in my ears, It was just incredible. I do think this discussion is about casual fans. So when I was at the Durban test, I found that a lot of people were there without regard to Ireland versus South Africa. They didn't know anything about Ireland. They hadn't followed, the last 3 or 4 years. I mean, they knew it was Ireland, but they didn't have any deep appreciation of it. They didn't understand the role of a box kick. They didn't, even really understand the scrum. They were just there for the vibe. And to be honest, it was a great vibe. But then we lost the game. And I didn't find people were upset about it enough. I felt like if I was walking out of Loftus with this result, people would be filthy. No one would talk at all. They would just be walking around glum,
storming out of there,
serious. Like in Durban, it's like, hey, let's get some curry. You're like, oh, but I want to kick some chairs. So, and I didn't find Cape Town to be like that at all. By the way, I think people, there's a proper rugby following that's fully engaged now in a new era. It's full Springbok. But I do think, I don't know. I've always thought Loftus really had a higher home pitch advantage than other teams. But what you're saying is this season, no.
That's so strange. I mean, anyway, leading into the Ireland test again in Durban, the one name that stood out in that test was Frawley. And this little guy pitched up here at Loftus as well, even though he was from the bench. So it's sort of a revenge game.
He's a good player.
The first question I want to ask you, and I'm this time stung firmly in cheek, please, or to all our Irish supporters here or viewers. Did the Irish disrespect the Bulls by coming with a second string team?
Well, I think it's battle planning, right? There's a war, there's a campaign. I guess we call it a campaign, actually. So the Leinster has a campaign and they have an objective. Is the objective, first and foremost, that they must be unbeaten? If remaining unbeaten would mess them up for Champions Cup and for the home run, probably not. So I could see why they platooned and did what they did. But hell, they came within, one reset scrum from pulling it off. And then they would look like geniuses. They would have probably liked that win more because they would say we went to Loftus and we rested, our incredibly exhausted Irish pack, because a lot of those guys played every minute, like Caelan Doris played 400 minutes. So, yeah, I get it. But then sport's really cruel because then, they have this feed on the scrum. You would think that they're able to get it in and out. But that points out when you have Slimani is your backup prop to Furlong and Porter instead of Slimani being your starting prop, and now you have the next guys in. It's not about having a dominant scrum and that you can only win if you have a crazy scrum. You just cannot afford to have any weakness in your scrum for 5 minutes. At any point in the game, if you have a weak scrum and you leak penalties for 10 minutes, that could be 3-4 penalties. And it is massive. It changes the game. So, I think Leinster will go back, scratch their head and wonder, was there a couple of players that, yes, they played in Six Nations, but not that much that we could have stuck in there that would have made the difference? Because I think it came down to 1 or 2 people. That's it.
Yeah. I personally wanted to say, don't let facts interfere with a good story here.
I don't think it's disrespectful. I think everyone's done it, gonna do it, gotta do it. I think if you're gonna compete in top 14 and champions, URC and champions, and challenge, everyone's doing this. I just think that the people who can play that chess game really well are going to be rewarded. And you could say Leinster and Toulouse have a little bit of upper hand because it's their B team and you have Geordie Barrett.
Yeah, that's true. Or Ergens Snyman for that matter. Yeah.
Right.
I mean, really. Now, on that subject, before we move on to the game itself, the Bulls have got a game coming up against Bayonne or Bayonne. You've been saying that's not going to be a walk in the park, and I'm wondering about. You talked about what are the goals of the campaigns? Are the Bulls really going to be happy to maybe win the Challenge Cup, or they're going to just say, "Listen, we need to make sure we make the top eight, get a home semi-final, get into the final, forget about the Challenge Cup." When I spoke to Jake a year ago on the side of the B field there, he said to me the Champions Cup to him, or to the Bulls at that stage, was not a priority. They were aiming for 2027 maybe to be fully competitive, the squad being where it should be, the depth being where it should be, and everything else. This little Challenge Cup adventure that they're going on now, so to me, it's just a bit of an annoyance, I would say, rather like the Stormers. You've got 5 games left until the end of May. Nice, easy run, nice games, not that difficult. Gonna, vault up the log there and be ready for those playoffs. The Bulls on the other hand, the Sharks and the Lions, and pretty much the same seat here. So, what do the Bulls do now? What do they focus on?
That's a really good question, right? So we cannot get it from the coach. The coach is first and foremost thinking about saving his job. So he's always going to set expectations low, and he's going to, in the dust, post battle, he's going to be able to say a thing, oh, well, it was too early, we had no right to even be in the semifinals. In fact, losing to Glasgow at home last year, that was almost ahead of schedule. I thought we were only going to get there 3 years from now. So he's just trying to keep his job. It's a bit like a general, who runs, he's in like Montgomery or something in the Second World War, and he's supposed to defeat Rommel. He's not the one in charge. Churchill is. And Churchill decides, which general can make it happen. And so it's just to win the war. But then you got to say, what kind of war is it? Like,
which war is it?
The Bulls should win titles because they're good enough. If you're the Harlequins in the Prem, our friend Jan Lowe, who's, I think, a season ticket holder at the Stoop, was telling me that they know they're not supposed to win. They're not going to win perennial title races. If the Quins can finish mid-table always, but never lower, and then on every 3 or 4 years, they beat Saracens, big, the Derby winner. They make a nice run in the Champions Cup, just a good run, because they got that style, they can win. Or once every 2 or 3 years, they're in the final 4 of the Prem. The place stays full, it's bouncing, the beer sells, it's a vibe, everyone goes, and they're fine. So you judge them on different standards. The Bulls, according to Jake White, the general right now, but he won't be the general forever, the Bulls are supposed to be a top club, a world, like top of the world. That's the real thing that the Bulls should be. With all the excuses, that every South African club absolutely has, that they're not even really excuses, they're realities, which is, we don't get to have Andre Pollard as much as, the top French club gets to have Jalibert and, Dupont. Like, it's a given that they're going to have their best players. Whereas, the Stormers can just keep pumping out amazing players, but Damon Dialende is not playing in Cape Town. So there is that. But even with all of that, I think Jake White has always been correct, which is that Loftus should be a place that if you go there and you win at Loftus, you should remember it forever. It's okay. It's that's the way it is. So I think you're going to get the truth from guys on the board speaking off the record who tell you the real thing, which is we set as performance standards, injuries factored in. So don't talk about injuries because everyone has injuries. We set as a standard that we had to get better every year, like something like that, And so what is better? That we're going to get at least to the finals in the URC and we're going to make a run in one of those, extra cups.
Yeah.
I think that's the standard for Bulls.
Yeah, but like you said, the war. I mean, Second World War, it was Churchill. But what if they were fighting the Korean War, for argument's sake, at the very same time? Which one do you choose now? This is sort of what it is, isn't it?
Well, there's fronts, right? So they had to decide whether to focus on Northern Europe or come through North Africa to Italy and then jump up. What was the softer target? Where could you fool Nazi Germany better? And then also near the end of the war was also, to what extent do we divert resources to Japan?
Yeah, that's true.
We
Bad
island
Japan.
hopping there. And so, but civilian leadership decided that. Roosevelt, Churchill, those guys were deciding that, not the generals. The generals could be fired. And the players, were like infantrymen. They went where they were ordered. So, I just beware the coach speak. Unless it's the kind of coach that's institutional, like, almost like God, like Sir Alec, yeah, sure. That he's not just a general. He's probably the general and the president at the same time.
I see some of our big Bulls supporters asked the question, why is Jake still the coach? I know why he's still the coach, because he's the best we've got available. People, just hang around.
Jake's a good coach.
Jake's a very good coach. I agree.
What we were frustrated with him, I think, and I'm not a Bulls fan, of course, but I was frustrated with it seemed like he was being a little bit slow on the uptake of how he had to speed up in the 22, improve exits, and work on scenario painting. And I mean, I'm not saying that he did all this because we were talking about it. I think he's just a clever guy, and he was probably believing in what he was doing before. And then I think at some point, it's hard to admit when we're not doing something great. I think he thought, well, maybe the players I've got and how they're thinking and in their 24-year-old brains as the world changes, my shtick is not working. And he modified, he evolved. And I think there's improvements. I think he's got one big, huge, massive problem, which is not his fault. Perhaps, I guess. I don't know who traded who did contract negotiations. But at 10, the game managers, there's a thing there. Okay, so
Yeah.
Jake was completely forthright post-match and saying, shouldn't have come to that. We were really stupid. He didn't name check anyone like Goodman for Ireland, who name checked Joe McCarthy. And I thought that was bad coaching. Jake just said in general, he said, we got to know where we are, what's happening in the game, the context. We got to do better. He talked about New Zealand, playing smart rugby for a long time. I think he could have said Springbok rugby and been more generous to Rossi, because I think we're the smart guys now. But it does seem like the Bulls, when it's crunch time or when there's controllables, avoidables, they seem to be making their life a little bit harder. Even if you win, like, why is Sebastian de Klerk taking someone out in the air when you need to have a calm voice before you do any kick chase and say, remember, we stay on the ground. We just stay on the ground and we look and we just time our hit, because you have access now. The turnover, the counter ruck, just walking over the ball of the guy who's tackled is your best bet. There's very little downside to that. There's huge downside to going half-hearted in the air or looking at the ball only. You cannot look at the ball only. That's not a defense. We learned that already. You're going to get pinged. And Jake was just saying that when that happened, I thought you'd lost the game. I thought, okay, that's it. Now it's gone.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I thought we lost the game when I saw the team being announced. I thought, oh my word, what are you smoking, Jake? Sorry, I'm just kidding, Jake. Please don't get angry at me. The point is, I thought, is this the best we've got available? I just later learned that Steenkamp was actually injured. That's why he wasn't selected.
Yeah.
But I think
I thought you had them in the pack on the lineup. I thought the pack could be fine. I worried more about, like you said, Frawley's coming on and steering the ship at the end. What's the Bulls doing?
Keep him away from the post. Let it not let him drop kick. Anything, yeah.
I love the fact that in all this desire to speed up the game and trim or truncate scrum superiority as a thing, the beauty of rugby is that you cannot run out the clock very easily. So Leinster has it. All they got to do is feed a scrum, skew. You just throw it under the feet of your guys. Should be simple. Route one, boom, done, kick in the stand, we win. We win at Loftus with not our best team. It's amazing, we're done. In the lead up to that, they're doing carries where they're specifically lying down on the floor, not even taking a tackle. So you flip from 9 to a big carrier and you just tell this 120 kg guy sit down on your arse and have 3 guys next to you, and they sit on you too, and do that. And if you can lose 5 meters per, we have 45 meters to work with. Do that 8, 9 times, you win the game. So like theoretically, there's a way to do that. I love that rugby is a continual contest for the ball, that possession never stops being contested for, and that even on set pieces, you're never safe, even though lineouts are much easier to win now than they were in 1975, 85, because of lifting and calls and stuff. And even though in scrums, because you can throw under your feet, you should be able to not suffer a tight head against you. I love that there's no escape. So the clock is dead. It's 85 minutes. You still have to feed a scrum and survive it. May we never lose that, because that's so much more dramatic. Think about it's the threat of the loss of the scrum that makes it still important. So if we get too wrapped up in speed of game, rush to reset, don't reset too many times. Oh, second reset, you just get a free kick. It would take all the drama out of that. And I thought it was super cool. And by the way, David Creel still had to make the kick. That's not the first time he's done that.
Yeah, and not the first time he would have missed it. He missed a couple right in front of the posts. Now, you and I were actually talking to each other while that scrum was being posted. I was all doom and gloom, and the Bulls this and the Bulls that. And you were saying they could have won this, and they basically threw it away. And then I said, what? I mean, we transatlantic WhatsApps flying up and down. I mean, it probably wasn't just you and me. That's exactly what you were saying. That's what makes the rugby game great. That tension, the last minute thing that can change. It reminds me of the Formula One world champion last race in 2021 when Lewis Hamilton was sort of robbed. Now I'm going to get crucified. If you've ever seen rugby people crucify, you wait for the Formula One guys.
You're speaking in Greek to me. I have no idea about Formula One. So.
Yeah, I'll tell you another day. The point is, the roller coaster of emotions only comes with a great game. That's what it's about. If it's just up and down, and I saw it Monday night at that Varsity Cup game when the Marties went over, but it was held up, and Marties got an attacking scrum. It changed the entire game rather than a goal line dropout. I mean, I wish they could bring that back. Exactly like you said now. You have to be rewarded for continuous pressure, because every time you go over and it gets held up. You said to me long ago when we started talking, all you do is you just pull the guy over the try line, but you don't allow him to ground it, and it's over. You get the ball back and you can kick it out. Remember?
It's become a specific coaching point. Yeah. And it's like on the defensive side, what is that from 5 in, your main goal is to start to lie down. You do it in concert. Hopefully you have 2 big guys. You soak tackle. You don't try to dominate tackle. You literally lose the collision on purpose, lie down, and then you try to squeeze a ball between Wilco Low and Malcolm Marks or someone. Like, it's impossible, And then you get a big guy to flop on top of you to obscure the camera. So then you have, Lua de Jager draped on top of Wilco Low with Malcolm Marks. Then you're a little guy with the ball trying to squeeze through that mass of humanity.
That obscuring the ball, sorry to interrupt you, that's actually also something that I heard somewhere is being lie so that camera can't pick up where the ball is.
Yeah. Because it's at that point when it's impossible to see, then it goes to the TMO, who poses a question, which is actually kind of ridiculous, which is, if I can't see it, I can't award it. Like, we award tries all the time where you don't see it. If a guy streaks away and he's a wing, he's way in front of the ref, he dives, you don't actually see it, but you say he must have. We just decide, probably got down. And so, we don't want to get to the point where we're always trying to do that. It's too easy to trick the TMO on held up. Held ups are so simple. If you just flood the zone, all your big guys jump on top.
One thing I wanted to ask you, again, firmly tongue-in-cheek, being a Bulls supporter living in the shadow of Loftus, as you call it. Is the Bulls now the Leinster's bogey side? We've beaten them 4 out of 6 times in the URC.
It is the kind of team that troubles Leinster and by extension Ireland, which is a proper counter-rucking, barging team, strong set pieces, a set piece team, a powered team, a reload team. Pragmatic is better. So I think the Bulls could have even done better and won by more if they'd been more pragmatic. I think the Bulls looked best and have looked best all season when they do a set piece to set piece, power-centric style, but accelerating in the red zone, and upping their ante and their pace and their risk when they get inside red zone. But for the main part of the game, the shape of the game, to kick, to chase, to pile on, to barge, to counter, to steal lineouts, to put pressure at the scrum, and win collisions. I mean, I think that's just proper Bulls rugby. That's DNA. That's never going to change. And then, the moments of magic. You get unlocked by a Villy. I do think if you were waving a magic wand and you said, I can steal a player right now from Leinster, and Leinster could steal a player from the Bulls or two, that'd be interesting. Like that would reveal if you had Jake drinking, 17 bottles of water and maybe one beer because he's hydrating like a crazy man for some reason. If you have him and telling you in truth serum, I would like to hear that.
Yeah, it's
I
a good
think he
question.
would. I think he would probably say Geordie Barrett.
Yeah, who
I
wouldn't?
think.
Mm.
I think he might like a guy like that. You get an extra kick, a big boot, a mind, a clever mind, good lines, crash tackler, incisive. I think the other one you might want to look at is someone at 9, like a real steering kind of 9, Jameson Gibson Park. If you had to look at the forwards, I don't know.
RG.
I mean, Dan Sheehan would be nice.
He's name checked RG often. I mean, so if I only have Andre Pollard and RG's name, I know it's got Andre. Now you only need to RG, then all his dreams will come true.
I mean, Archie is one of those truly unique players. I can totally see why Leinster picked Geordie and Archie. They're both very unicorn type players in size, in skill. There was a wraparound offload that Snyman did that I just couldn't even believe. I mean, he was so wrapped up. There were 3 guys smashing his ribs. One guy was pulling his beard off, and it didn't matter. He just, well, whatever. He's just so big.
Yeah, I saw
And,
your
and he's
tweet about the
calm.
Portugal game. Remember the Wild
Yeah.
Dogs? It popped up as well. Sorry about to interrupt you.
Yeah, it took 4. It took 4. Like the first 2 guys, and 3, and then finally someone tripped him from behind. He's like, okay, I'll go down.
For a bit, just a little bit. You mentioned pragmatism, and that came down to the Bulls, going back to what worked for them. And that to me, we've often talked about this the last 20 minutes where the Bulls sort of fade away. And they never really faded away in this one. They kept fighting and they kept coming back into the game
Yeah.
because they went back to basics. Now that comes down, you mentioned this to me, and I want you to talk to me about this a bit more and explain it to me as a non-rugby player. You still do more coaching for various teams and the likes. Scenario planning. How can you possibly plan for a scenario? How do you know what's going to happen? We saw the relief on Marcel Coetzee face when Kriel kicked that kick over, and the way he talked to Sebastian de Klerk, gave him a little rub of the head, and Jake was livid. I mean, he just called it. He didn't mention Sebastian de Klerk by name, but that was a stupid thing, and it all comes down to scenario planning as well. You mentioned before we don't jump in the air, we stay on the ground.
There
Talk
was
to me
no
about
need. Yeah,
scenario. Yeah,
exactly.
talk to me
Yeah.
about scenario
Yeah.
planning. How does that work?
Well, it's situational awareness. So the scoreboard matters. Your team can be coached in being 2 behind, being 4 behind, being 8 behind, and 11 behind. Every single time, every time I change that number, you actually do different things. There's different risk quotients that you'll use, and your team can know that. No one can leave unless they know that in a practice or in a session where you're with your rugby books and you're actually working through. Is it better when you're up by 2 and you have a carry and you are a little bit isolated, you get tackled? Is it almost better for you to let the guy pull for it than to hold on? Because now you're going to lose a penalty if you hold on and they get a shot at the poles. It's 1 minute left. If you just let them take it, there's not a penalty. They just take it. And then you're a defender. It's fine, So you have instincts that say, no, I got to hold on. And then, and it's the worst possible thing you could do in that scenario. Now you're going to wait to watch Geordie Barrett have a kick at poles where he probably makes it and you lose. Where if you went down into a blind alley, the guy gets over you, just give it to him. Like literally give it to him. And then the ref's not going to blow the whistle probably. Inside that, there's a function of time and space. Where am I on the field? What's the score and how much time left? And you have all your players need to think like captains, coaches, that kind of brain, it's not enough to be effort. I was trying. Oh, I really was going hard. Like, no, I don't want you to. Sometimes I want you to not do that. Um, if a guy's already going to be into touch, then don't come in late and try to apply that finishing touch. Then he dips at the net, and then you get carded, and now you're off. I needed you on the field. Let's see. I think on restarts, for example, if you're down by 8 and it's 10 minutes to go and you have a restart, you go challenge in the air. You do the Sebastian Leclerc. I mean, actually, at that point, it's almost like you have to get the ball back at some point. You're 8 down. You have to score twice. And so those kind of, there's good fouls. There's good penalties. There's bad penalties. You're camped out on your line and you're already suffering from advantage. Just keep killing the ball. I mean, the ref's not going to really pile on. If it's early in the game, they're not going to card you. So just keep killing the ball. Do not let them score the try. Make them take the 3. That kind of stuff. That's clever. And I think the Boks are playing that way. All Blacks did for ages. I think Ireland's a really clever team, a street savvy team that can play above their physiques. Scarily, now the French are getting smart finally. I think the Bulls have to be smart to get to the top level. I think there's no problem with the Bulls being in the top 4, top 5, top 3 of the ERC perennially at this point. They seem like they've got that. It's about the cutting edge, and that's why Jake immediately talked about the playoffs when he said that. He said, fine, we're scrambling around here. We're just surviving. We're doing okay. We're winning more than we're losing. But if we're going to actually win a cup, then we have to get in our minds where we are, what's going on, and realize that when you're chasing a kick, when you're up, and the game is almost dead, it's different than when you're chasing a kick and it's 0-0, minute 1, and you're in the midfield, so no one can even make a penalty kick over.
No,
what happened, what ensued from that is then they were able to set up phase play. And then the Bulls infringe at the ruck, which is almost as stupid as the chase card, because there was no reason. Leinster wasn't going anywhere. They weren't really doing line breaks. They weren't finding an edge. You could just keep soaking up that pressure, and they're going to knock on the ball. You just focus on hard tackles. Somebody's going to spill the ball.
Yeah. Now, I wanted to ask you one more question about the Bulls now, and that is the fact that Marcel Coetzee was the captain. Old head, experienced head, one who's been there, done that, seen it all, compared to the younger captains that Jake's been giving regular opportunities to be the captain. Do you think that played a role? To me, that made it, I could clearly see that influence there. Calm down, play what we do, and not like, getting a bit hot-headed almost, if I can call it. What do you think of that side of it?
Yeah, well, it's funny because I think Marcel earlier in his career was kind of a hothead, but I think he's definitely, like you said, he's grown. I think he was really good at Ulster. He was a mainstay at Sharks. He's had injury problems, but sometimes when you have injury problems, it gives you time to think about the game and maybe you study it some more. I don't know, but he seems like a smart kid. We just talked about how the Bulls sort of made a rod for their own backs and made the win harder. So, I guess you wouldn't congratulate the captain on that situation. But I think I know what you mean, which is I find him impressive. I find him emotionally savvy, how he works with the ref. He never gets the ref offside with him. I think even that moment where he knew that Sebastian de Klerk had done something stupid, he just, put his hand on the guy's head and just went like, hey, hey, brother. But also kind of, don't complain because it's obvious. And that way he didn't make the ref antagonized. And then only a minute later, he needed the ref to make a 50-50 call for him. And then 3 minutes later, another one. So in a way, I'm not accusing the ref of being emotionally manipulated. I'm just saying you don't want to make it harder for the ref to give you a 50-50 by going histrionic and, pleading your case when the referee's like, that was the easiest call of the match, was the Seb, cut the guy out in the air. It was reminiscent of Ronan O'Gara in the Lions tour in 2009, taking out Farida Priya to give Mornay Stain a chance to win at Loftus. We're just like, it's a brain fart where you go, there was really, you had a 1% chance of that coming out. You weren't gonna beat the Irish guy in the air. He was already in the air. The catcher always has the advantage under the interpretation of the rules. You got to give him a landing spot. So the only time you go in the air is when you literally think that you've managed to get to the space where the ball theoretically will get before as the chaser. Otherwise, you're 95% better if you just hang time and then smash him, like unbelievably erase him. Lots of things can happen there. A knock on, a counter ruck, your mates come and join you and walk over the ball. The ball, does go backward, but it goes squirrely, and now Leinster's chasing. There's just so many ways where a good chase timed can help you. So yeah, I think that's what Jake is talking about with scenario painting.
I wanted to ask you, you said typical Bulls rugby. Okay, I understand the term, but I want to ask you about the mechanics of it. I'm talking about similar situation, typical Stormers rugby and typical Sharks rugby, whatever. I mean, Jake hasn't been the Bulls coach forever. He's at the Sharks and the Brumbies and the Springboks and everywhere around the world, Montpellier, Dobson, everyone else. The players playing for the Bulls, not all of them grew up in Pretoria. I mean, often some of them came from Stormers, whatever. Is it something they drink in the water that now suddenly they make them play Bulls rugby? I mean, what is it? It's not the buildings or the field or whatever that makes them play that. Is it the pressure from do you get where I'm going with this question? How do they play Bulls rugby? How do they know how to play? Why do they play Bulls rugby? How does that work actually? Because there's institutional memory. It's a funny one, that, to me.
Yeah, no, that's a good question. When you talk to people like Leicester Tigers at Welford Road, they go, "That's proper Tigers rugby," and you're like, "It's Julia Montoya, Hanro Liebenberg, Andre Pollard, Izzy Paresi from Australia." I'm like, why? Like, in what way did that happen? Toulouse rugby, Blair Kinghorn, Chocobatis, they're playing, proper Southern French rugby. So it's a bit of a construct. So let's be honest, like you said, they're not from, Cameron Honeycomb is not a Bulls guy, but, here he comes playing a little bit like the second coming of Pierre Spies. I think it derives from the map. Geography matters, terrain matters, climate matters. I think there is a particularly difficult proposition of playing against your teams from schools on up. The field just feels like you're being tackled on a road. I remember like tackling back in those days, the Northern Transvaal, and feeling like every single tackle felt like most of my skin had left my body. And obviously it was worse in the Free State, but the feeling of the turf not being as lush and cushy, that's changed with groundskeeping now and irrigation, but it's still kind of like, I remember watching the Wallabies arrive at Loftus and thinking, yeah, the Boks are from all over and they're different places, but today they're playing like Bulls Boks, and it's going to be a stampede. You're going to feel like you're in the Pamplona running with the Bulls in Pamplona, but the Bulls have all been given cocaine or something. And there's something about the sound, the feel, the smoke, the night air, the early evening air in Pretoria. I don't know. I think you can inherit it. I think you can rock up from other places and absorb it. But I think it comes from the evolution of how rugby is played very quickly, by the way. It's not just big Bulls packs. It's a weird, wicked combination of speed and power. But I guess it's blunt. I guess what it is, it's not nuanced. It's, we're gonna beat you up, we're gonna really hurt you, and then we're gonna run by you. And we're gonna get a lot of balls bouncing too high, too awkwardly, in a way that the ball would not bounce at Kings Park, at Newlands, at Cape Town Stadium. The ball bounces differently. If you can get the ball to bounce at Loftus and land in open spaces, it's just horrible when you're defending. It's just, you're off to the races.
Well, the Bulls bounce the ball, let the ball bounce this weekend.
Both ways, right?
Yeah.
It's like if you spill it or if you kick it. So I do think there's a reason why rugby in the Highveld developed the way it did, with altitude, hard grounds, natural innate speed and natural innate, farm strength, which then, now in a city environment with proper training grounds, it's sort of, it's not as, pronounced. I don't think it's Louis Moulman kind of stuff, but it's got a certain, it's got DNA. It's got DNA. I think around the world, if you go into Australia, there is a way the Queensland Reds are supposed to play, and they always play better when the Reds play more like Reds, and they just start to come right. Crusaders, Southern Island of New Zealand, they're supposed to play a certain way. When they go away from it, they have the worst season of their whole history. When they come back to it, suddenly they're back on top of the log. Jake coached sort of the same way wherever he did. I read his book about how he came to that, the thought process. And he's a very percentage-based coach, and he has his own theories, and he's probably going to be pretty fixed in those. But when he came to the Brumbies in Australia, he turned a team around. And to this day, he's revered in Canberra for bringing pragmatism, and it's stuck. And it's almost like he reinvented the team, and they stayed with it. He's the kind of guy who would give players really simple choices and expect them to keep them in their mind. I want Butch James to fly off a certain way. I don't need him to play this elegant way. I'm going to play off 9, and then I want him to kick really long and kick, properly, and then, chasing. There's things that I think Jake came to the Bulls already fit for the Bulls. I want to point something out here. The Bulls became a high offloading team and a high scoring team. And in some ways, 2 or 3 years ago, whenever he rocked up, it's almost like Jake was different than Jake. So, I want to throw that in there. I don't want to be simplistic and oversimplify Jake. He can do different things. But I almost think like he's gone through that and realized that in the end, the Bulls are better when they play Bulls type rugby. It's a bit like bringing Tony Brown into the box. I mean, it really is good to be able to play different ways. But in Durban, when we needed to get back in the game before we get blown out, it was 18 straight points based on ruck and scrum penalties that Pollard banged over. And that's the only reason why, Frawley had to make that drop kick. If we kept playing wide, we were going to lose, by 15.
Interesting thing that I read today, I think in the report, where Johan Roux from the Red Dyes are saying that the Stormers are doing well. They they're making plans to keep the younger players, school players, and the likes, but they can't afford the big salaries. But the point is, things are going better at the Stormers now. And I had an interesting stat the other day. Linwood Road, which runs past Loftus, the southern end of it, from the one end to the other end, 37 rugby fields on that road. So don't tell me all the rugby in South Africa is born in Paarl or Stellenbosch for that matter. There's a very strong rugby culture here as well. I want to point that out. Seeing what you're saying about the DNA and, is it in the water, whatever. Don't underestimate Pretoria's rugby culture.
I love that evidence that you're using that's why we can know where the players come from instead of just saying, where did the players come from? I think on Origin Day, you wear your school socks. I think we can see exactly where they came from. No, listen, I think I've said, having gone to Loftus recently, after kind of growing up with Loftus as being kind of the evil empire, and it was difficult to play up in Pretoria, and it seemed like the fights were more real back in the day when I was playing. Like you actually did try to kill each other. I think there's a deep love affair in Pretoria, in that whole area with rugby that's incalculable. And it's heartland. There's a few places in the world that without them, if they were not part of the rugby universe, the Western Cape, Pretoria, Butch, Auckland, the Dublin schools now, the southern part of France. As much as other people don't like them, or sometimes we don't like those places ourselves because they annoy us, Christchurch, New Zealand. They're so beautiful. The tapestry of what that is, of how deeply important it is, how rugby is deeply important in the culture of where you're from, of what you talk about on Monday, whether your mood is good. Even when you're talking to your friends and their son is coming up, maybe their daughter nowadays coming up in rugby, and you want to talk about that. It's a bond. I remember one of my best coaches ever would always invite to the opening braai of the season all the fathers. They had to come to, and then would just talk about your rugby. Tell me about your rugby, and you tell stories. So that is deeply ingrained. What I think is exciting is that in South Africa and other places in Ireland as well is new places and new parts and new communities and new cultures are also catching the bug. And then that's trouble for the world, because I think if you can get into these other places, and, a guy like Sio Kolisi may have done more for rugby off the field than on the pitch, just with his ability to reach out. There's an American woman player who's got 8 million followers, I mean, I don't know how good a player she is. I don't think that she's that great, but in the women's game. But I think that's interesting. I think more people caring about it, and maybe not also always thinking that our game is messed up and it needs to be fixed, and you have to change the laws every 5 seconds. Just acknowledge sometimes when things are going well and let them ride for a while. We just need to make sure that people understand the game. So for me, in stadium, besides having a pumping DJ every 5 seconds, have explanatory things that come up. I like this, initiative where the referees are explaining themselves more, and you kind of get more of the feel of why they got to where they are. That's good.
Yeah, and also in the stadium where you can actually hear them. I think actually they did at Loftus. I wasn't there, but you could hear the ref when he was making big calls.
Yeah, it's great.
That I like, because that's one of the things I miss being at Loftus, but you've got no idea what's going on there. You get all the excitement in the atmosphere. But talking about, new audiences and new markets, and part of the reason rugby is trying to fix itself when it's not broken, make everything faster and more exciting, whatever, is to attract new audiences. And you mentioned to me an article about Bernard Jackman, your good friend Bernard Jackman, that he wrote about how rugby is changing again. Players are becoming smaller, faster, more agile. I mean, is that necessarily a good thing? Tell me about that, please. I couldn't read the article, unfortunately, but tell me about that.
Yeah, so I want to make sure I get it right. What he was saying is, it's almost like we're going to the extremes of size and power at the same time as some of our most important players, more than ever, are the smallest guys. So it's weird. We're getting bigger and smaller. Maybe it's the mediumness that's going out of the game. So you have giants, top level strength, the size of the best hookers nowadays. They're so much bigger than old hookers from 30 years ago. The size of, midfielders, the centers, they would definitely be viewed as flanks or number 8s, or maybe even locks sometimes if you went back 30, 40 years. So I don't want to oversell the idea of downsizing, but because of the way the game is being officiated and some of the tricks and nuances of protection behind the ruck of whoever is playing the 9 at that moment, because it doesn't have to have your 9 on the back. It's just whoever is fishing the ball out. The protection around that is meaning that you can have more space. The access on the chase and the aerial game. Rugby is getting much more sophisticated at kick passing, finding trams through the boot. And you just need agility. You need agility for the rush defense. You need, the swivel-hipped leckerback we talk about. It's catching on. Almost every team now has an incredibly small guy, not just at 9, but there's somewhere on the field a Darcy Graham. You can look at Louis Bielbieri. He's tiny. I mean, he literally looks like an under 16 player in South Africa. He doesn't even look like an under 20s guy. Mark Talea is a slight guy. He's not a big heavyweight, and he's routinely good in contact. Just show me Edville van der Merwe's ability to bounce off people, or the ability of Arendse to actually manage someone and pull them into touch. They're strong. So it's not even about, just being quick. So what Bernard Jackman's talking about is every time you make a shift in law anywhere, there's going to be this unintended consequence that defensive coaches or attack coaches can pivot and capitalize on. And I just think it's part of the greater story of rugby, which is there's so many different ways to win or lose. Look at the way the Stormers won and the way the Bulls won on the same weekend. Play a lot of the players coming from the same schools, obviously almost identical backgrounds in rugby, but ridiculous changes and differentness. And also you can negate the Bulls with their scrum excellence was able to negate all the things that made it look like Leinster was about to win. It's like a chess game, The rook can move here, the bishop can move there, the queen can move here, the pawn can only, it doesn't matter. At some point, if I can find your weakness, I can make it happen. So you cannot just load up your team with little guys. That's not what Jackman's saying. But you probably need in your squad of 23 a couple of players like that. The Kwachas, the Dion Faris, these hybrid players. It's actually a very interesting time to be in rugby.
Okay, now let's talk about this step down we have to do now. At the Six Nations, and it was exciting, and we even started watching and found ourselves supporting England of all teams for a bit there. It's very short while.
Don't remind me.
No, don't worry, it's over now.
Dirty.
Back to normal, back to business. Thank you very much. But now it's club rugby time again, and when the word or the term club rugby gets mentioned, the Harry Index rears its head. I'm not going to say it's ugly head. I'm going to say it's totally impartial, completely, infallible head. You brought out your Harry Index earlier on Sunday. Tell me firstly, why did you bring it out earlier? I mean, there's still some games to go in France, and what's it look like at the moment?
Well, the Harry Index is temperamental. The index is this sort of mythical being. I speak to it, but it does what it wants, and so sometimes it's top 12, sometimes it's top 10, sometimes it refuses to go beyond the top 4 because no one deserves it. But timing is also part of it. My understanding through smoke signals and Braille and other ways we communicate, the Ouija board, the Harry Index decided that the games that are happening today, which involve Gloucester, Cherry and Whites against Bath, don't really matter, because even if Johan van Graan's team was to slip up, it doesn't really matter at this point inside the larger ranking systems. We have the Six Nations where we see that players are absolutely out on their feet. The Northampton Saints were just destroyed by Leicester Tigers. Finn Smith looked like he had no juice in his legs. Most of the back line for the Saints was England. They were trying to play what they had just been playing on sort of drier fields, and it was a rainy day. Franklin's guard, it wasn't working. And so Andre Pollard and his mate Julian Montoya and his big friend Hanno Liebenberg, none of whom played Six Nations, they were just rolling over. Right? And so the point is, like, the Harry Index knows that, right? And so you kind of go, that 33-0 win by the Tigers over the Saints, it doesn't really, change the apple cart that much. But by the same token, this deep into the Premiership, if you have a team like Bath that's going so well on points differential, clearly above the fray in the Premiership on wins, losses, and points differential, if they drop one right now to Gloucester, who is also fine, they're doing well, but doesn't deserve to be in the top 12 of any index, it won't be the be all and end all. Same thing with Bordeaux playing Toulouse. How many of the actual top flight players for those teams are going to be playing? And so that would matter over a long period of time, but not in any one weekend. So index goes out and basically ranks the teams right now as they are. And you would say, why isn't Leinster slipping from the loss? Again, this is not an unthinking index that just goes the loss, the win, the margin. It factors in, who was named for the team and the fact that we're still just post Six Nations. There are probably players that are carrying all kinds of injuries. They don't want to talk about it publicly, but they just need some time off. So, I've got Leinster and Toulouse and Bordeaux still top of the pile. I've got Toulon pushing, but I've got the top 14 kind of, the Hunger Games of the top 14 is decimating the people below those three teams, Toulouse, Bordeaux, and Toulon. So then I'm actually the rise of the Super Rugby teams, primarily the New Zealand teams, where we see the Chiefs and the Crusaders stacked full of All Blacks, the number 2 team in the world on test level, playing some really devastating rugby. And as our friend Hugh Griffin says, we cannot just dismiss the high scoring of Super Rugby and set it aside and say that it's just Super Rugby. High scoring is happening all over the world because of this rush up, template that the refs have put on. So there's just more time that you have to defend, more time that you have to attack, and a little more fatigue placed into the game. Beyond that, our friends Glasgow, I think, are still handling their business, but they don't look convincing. So I've got them at 7th in the world. I think Bath, Bulls, Bath, who knows? Bristol, the 3B teams. We almost will know much more about this when we get to playoff land. Who makes the playoffs in the Prem and who gets into that final 2 will really matter there. The Bulls still are probably the best opportunity for South African teams to go far in the ERC. The Stormers have always had this really good sail in, full spinnaker, southeasterly, beautiful Table Bay, final 4 games, sailing at home against beatable teams. Another one coming up against Ulster, who looked, none too convincing. There's a world in which the Bulls and the Stormers play each other in the playoffs, which didn't look very likely, about a month ago.
That'll be devastating. Not because the Bulls are going to lose, that's what I'm saying. It's just a pity, man. It would have been nice to, maybe play in the final again because there's a score to be settled from 2 years ago.
So the Bulls are my only South African team in the top 12 of the Harry Index, and I think the Bulls deserve to be a top 10 team in the world. What's setting them just below some of the other teams is, Bath has Finn Russell really running things, and I think, each team that you look at above, there's a guy running the show, and even if it's not at fly-off, it could be Will Jordan for the Crusaders. It could be a guy like Kyle Stain playing so well for Glasgow. But someone that's doing that cutting edge stuff is what's going to make the Bulls season implode or explode over the next month, I think.
I don't think they can turn it around in this season. So I'm worried about that. You talked about why we're not there. It's because the gaps in our lineup, the Bulls lineup. People are going to find that weakness. 10 is a weakness. The bully didn't work, so we played a retread scrum off at fly off. We didn't do badly.
He wasn't bad, to be fair.
He played well. I actually spoke to him as well. Quite an impressive young man, if I can use that term. One last thing, I saw Mani Libbok is apparently looking for a new place to call home 2 years before his contract expires. That's interesting, don't you think?
Probably smart for him, for Mani as a person. I would think actually he would pick up some skills. It might benefit from it. It doesn't harm his Bok, career. Mm-hmm. I think at Stormers, he's a bit jammed into a structure where there's four guys that have to fit into 2, and 4 doesn't fit into 2. I really think that Sasha at 10 looked really good. That's where he must stay. And if that's the case, and if he's growing and adding, he looked magisterial at times. Like he was the only player on the field that he was directing, even things that didn't quite come off. He chips the line, the Scarlets line, regathers, showing incredible pace, but also poise. And in a second, almost like Willie LaRue would do, he sees his wing, corner of his eye, and kicks this like beautiful top spin. It just misses by an inch. And the guy would be away in the corner. And a quicker wing would have got it. You just go, wow, that guy. Mani's looking at that and thinking, I was the attacking virtuoso fly off, the no-look guy who could do this and that. Sasha can do all the things that I'm doing. He's younger. He's quicker. He's taller. He's got a lot of things going for him. Probably that's the future. Do I really want to be the backup, everywhere? Or could I go somewhere and be the feature player? So I think it's smart for him. You even have behind that, you have, Yuri that didn't look too bad. You have other guys coming up from from under 20s. I forgot his name right now, but there's actually promising guys. So we have the opposite problem to you. We have a glut of 10s, 15s, and 12s, and we really need some of your loose forwards, probably.
Interesting thing about who's talking to him. Apparently, Leicester Tigers is in the running. I mean, they need to replace Andre Pollard, and they were talking about Jack Crowley from Ireland. But Marnie is apparently in the running, and also the Racing 92. Those are top clubs there. I mean, this means it shows you how highly Marnie is actually rated, isn't it?
I think he should go to the French club. Actually, I think you get more game time. I think he'll benefit from the French mentality, particularly at that club, of really taking risks and doing crazy stuff, and it's okay, because I think the more he can do without that feeling of being judged, hooked, yanked, benched, I think he will produce more of those magic moments. I think it's a good move for him. I mean, it's sad in a way because I do like him in the blue and white hoops. I like him as a province man. I think he fits the vibe. But I just think career-wise, it's important to know when you're stacked behind people, and they might even leapfrog you. And his agent's doing a smart thing.
Right. Spend another hour talking about rugby, and we can probably go another hour. So we'll leave it for next Thursday when we'll do episode 65. I'm sorry, 65. Thanks, Harry. Appreciate that.
Jeez, that's a lot. Good chat.
It's the Lekker Rugby Pod, only on Megaphone Rugby.